Hello, I'm Adam, and welcome to the MindField podcast. As you can see, I'm kind of flying solo this week. Warren will be back with us next week. But yeah, I'm on my own this week with our very special guest, Patrick Doyle. Patrick is a clinical psychotherapist, and he's here to talk about. Now, I need to put this on the screen because I do tend to mix up my words when I'm saying this, Patrick. So Patrick is talking to us about the world according to you, an exploration of the nature of reality and our mental health. Now, this sounds really fascinating, Patrick. So before we get into it, do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. So I'm a consultant psychotherapist. Sorry to correct you there.
Sorry.
Said similar. I've been working in mental health for over 20 years. Started out in psychiatric secure services, working with mentally disordered offenders, people who had committed quite serious crimes and obviously have mental health difficulties. So sections. More recently, in the last 10 to 15 years, started up my own clinic and practice based on sort of individual therapy, and did lots of training as well in mental health, and worked with lots of different organisations in a consultative sort of role. In a nutshell, if that captures everything.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of experience within mental health, haven't you? And you've worked in a lot of different settings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah, just do you want to kind of kick off and start explaining the theme that you've kind of brought to us?
Absolutely, yeah. So this theme, how we look at the world, how we going to use a word now. I want to replace a word that most people sort of use in this capacity. When we see the world, when we look at the world, we say that we perceive the world. That's correct. I'm not taking issue with that, but we perceive the world first, then we conceive of it. And these two things happen almost simultaneously in our brain through some very complex neurological gubbins, which we might sort of touch on. But what happens is we perceive the world first through our senses, and then we conceive of it, we extract meaning. So I'll demonstrate this now. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Just using Adam as a guinea pig. If I said to you, Adam, what's this I have in my hand, what would you say without wishing to sound patronising?
A glass of water.
Brilliant. So just ignore the water for a second. I just want to focus on the object that's surrounding it. So if I said to you, Adam, glass isn't real, what would you say?
Yeah, they are.
Okay. So one more step. So just focusing on this object. I'm not for a second going to try and convince you that there isn't an object. I can feel it. I've just picked it up off the desk here. You can see it. I can see it. And obviously if I make a sort of tapping sound. So there is an object there. But what I'm suggesting and what I'm kind of wanting everyone to sort of think about is that two separate things are happening all at once. There is an object in my hand that I can feel, touch, etc. But it's the thing that we call it, the idea that we use to identify it, that isn't real. So glass isn't real, therefore, is it? I think you'd agree. The object is real. It is a manufactured object made out of various materials that are melted and poured into a mold, and that's what the word glass, which is a signifier, signifies the object that I'm holding. So there is two separate things. There is the object itself, which is the thing I perceive, and how I conceive of it, the language and idea that I use to identify it. That's the bit that we want to play with, and that's the bit that trips us up a lot. So I just want to use, again, using you, Adam, as a sort of a litmus here. Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So taking a little journey now. I'll tell you a little story about a French philosopher who's become very important in scientific thinking recently, who first identified this conundrum. A chap called Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who was this is a bit of a mouthful, a French phenomenologic existentialist, which is a type of philosophy, existentialism. And Maurice, we'll call him for purposes of the story. He, in late 45, I think it was, he was writing a book called The Phenomenology of Perception. And he was sat in his garden in his French villa at the south of France. And he noticed that his swimming pool was going green. So he went down to the bottom of the garden in his villa and discovered that the pump, the filtration pump that obviously kept everything clean and kept the water flowing, had clogged up and stopped working. And obviously that was the cause of his swimming pool going green. So the next day he arranged for some local workmen to come and drain the pool and begin fixing this pump and replacing parts. And he was sat again by the pool, and he was quite sort of struck by the difference in what he saw from the previous day. The previous day, the pool had been full of water, slightly green, obviously, but the water had been sort of gently rippling with the breeze, and obviously the bottom of the pool was being refracted with the light, so it was constantly moving. But now there was no water in the pool, so he could actually see the bottom of the pool as it actually exists. And he started to think about, this is how we see the world. He sort of made the contrast between the world being the pool and our minds and how we see it and how we distort it being the water in the pool. And he was quite struck with that, and began to sort of untangle this idea of the world. He said the world is already always there as a reality, and how we perceive the world through our senses is the closest we'll ever come to sort of actually experiencing the world as it truly is, because there's layers of thought and meaning and concept and extrapolation and assumption that we put on top of it based on everything that we experience. So again, using you, Adam, how old are you? Just remind me.
40, Patrick. Yeah.
So you've had 40 years experience of being Adam, and that perspective on life is totally unique. Everything that you've ever experienced shapes that reality. Obviously, I'm slightly older than you. I'm 55. But we share lots of common sort of things. You know, we live in the northwest of England. We have a certain outlook because of that, because of the schools that we went to. So there are some similarities, but there are more differences. And the way that our mind works is that we look at the world and we want to look for evidence that confirms our idea of it. And this is called the confirmation bias. And it's the biggest part of the conceptual part of our mind that trips us up. So if you have a certain viewpoint about Blackburn Rovers being a fantastic team, you know, you're going to want to see evidence that they are. And when they win, brilliant, fantastic, they've won, what a fantastic team. And didn't that remind us when they won the Premiership back in the 90s, etc. But when they lose, you know, so all the time our mind is looking for evidence that the world is as we see it. But what's really important about that is that we begin to discard evidence that actually might, if we examine it, might help us understand the world more accurately. So two things are really important there. We're looking for evidence that confirms our beliefs, our ideas about the world, and we discount anything else that doesn't sort of match up with that. And what we need to do in mental health, if this causes us problems, is stop this narrowing of our view and open it up. So we become like detectives in our own life. We're not looking for murders, obviously, but we're trying to understand what's happening to us, how we play a part in that, how we take control. So if you've ever walked past a crime scene or you've seen a crime scene on television, you'll notice the tape, the cordon. And to the general public, that says, all right, you can't go in there because this is an active crime scene. But what it says to the police and the detectives and everyone involved in the investigation is that everything within this cordon is potential evidence. And it's helpful to try and sort of have the same viewpoint in your life. Look at your life as a crime scene and try, if possible, to consider everything before we act or react. And then we begin to see that actually, if we examine more outcomes and consequences, we begin to see that we can become less reactive and more proactive, if that makes sense.
Do you think that changes as we get older, Patrick? Do you think we become more considered?
Yeah, I think most people can say that, you know, they learn things as they go along. Sometimes we don't. We get stuck in our ways. We have habits, ways of reacting that, despite our age, despite the way that this hasn't worked for us in the past, we still want to do that. You know, drinking addiction is a good example of that. You know, at the end of the day, you might think, "Oh, well, tough day. I can murder a pint." That's fine, you know, having a couple of pints in the evening. But if you've had a really crappy day and you want more pints, that's going to have a knock-on effect. And if that becomes habitual, it then becomes problematic because obviously there's more cost and benefit.
So how do we, you know, for people that are watching and they're thinking, yeah, this sounds really, really good, but, you know, I struggle to pick apart my own crime scene. I struggle to pick apart what is evidence and what's not, and I don't know how to examine it. How do we do that?
So two things. First of all, it's important to understand slightly more the mechanics of that, and that involves the limbic system, which I'll sort of take you through in a minute. And then once we're aware of how that pattern begins to repeat itself, that informs us, that tells us how we can stop habitual behaviors, how we can stop thinking habitually, how we can stop behaving habitually, and move away from things that cause us harm to move towards things that are more helpful. So if you think about 3 circles in space in a line, 1, 2, 3, the first circle, it's a very simplified sort of conceptualization of the limbic system, is the amygdala. So the amygdala is where many of our emotions live. It's like our early warning system, and it's where the flight or fight system lives. So if anyone's read The Chimp Paradox, you'll be very familiar with the amygdala, etc. So actually 3 states to the fight or flight system. There's fight, freeze, and flight. So obviously it's anxiety, and the amygdala, therefore, is like an early warning system. It's operational all the time. So we are actually anxious all of the time. It's just about the severity or degree of that. And obviously, if you've lived quite a traumatic life, you become hypervigilant.
Yeah.
When any of those 3 states are activated, a signal is sent to the hypothalamus. It's the hypothalamus's job to control all the what we call autonomic functions of the body, or it's like a little smart control. So right now we don't have to think about breathing unless we take conscious control of our breathing. I don't have to think about my heart continuing to breathe, making sure I'm alive. I don't have to think about the food being digested in my stomach. I don't have to think about my heart rate beating at a certain rate to make sure the blood supply is constant. The hypothalamus takes care of that automatically. But when the fight or flight mechanism is activated, it then gets the body ready to do one of these 3 things: to confront something, to run away, or panic. I don't know what to do. And those experiences or symptoms we have of breathlessness, heart pounding, butterflies, that's the hypothalamus getting the body ready to fight or flight, principally. What then happens is the hippocampus remembers this. The hippocampus is part of the memory and learning system, and it's a very, very small part of the brain, but it's an extremely important part of the brain because it forms habit and learning. So if we do something in response to a stimulus that's detected in the environment, something that we need to confront or run away from, it's the hippocampus that remembers this. So the next time it happens, it wants us to do the same thing. Now, what we have to do is think, is this helpful? Me going to the pub again tonight and downing 6 pints of beer because I've had a really crap day again, is this going to work? Because I was really hungover this morning, and I'm starting to understand and realise that actually alcohol is a central nervous depressant. So why am I so surprised that I'm depressed? I know, why don't I stop drinking and why don't I go for a walk instead? So you're moving away from unhelpful behaviours or maladaptive behaviours that are habitual towards something that is more helpful and adaptive, that actually improves our mental health, not sort of helps it deteriorate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. We've got some comments here as well. So I'll just flash these up for you. Literally, flashbang theory. People usually get things wrong when they relay the information as they've had time to be externally influenced. That's what you were saying. Yeah.
So it's really helpful to think about 3 types of evidence, if you will. There are facts, which usually have to do with cause and effects. For example, if I drop this phone, it's going to sort of go downwards because of gravity. If I do it 100 times, the same thing will always happen. So that's indisputable. It's provable. It's demonstratable. The next set is opinions. Opinions are short-term sort of perspectives on things that might change. For example, we've all been through a torrid time with COVID, and the government perhaps in some people's eyes hasn't responded altogether ethically all the time. So some people have a perspective on that. And then there are beliefs, which are longer term perspectives that are influenced by our upbringing, our culture, and our parents, etc. And it's useful to think about what is influencing my decision. Is it factual, or is it an assumption that is based on a perception? An opinion or a belief. So slowing that process down, as the person that's commented is suggesting, rather than going flashbang, here we go, this is what I've done because I've always done it. Or hang on a minute, what's the most feasible, helpful thing to do here? So slowing that process down of reaction and being more proactive is helpful.
Yeah, and you know, obviously, what you're saying is resounding with people, as you can see there. Holy, I know what that says, but that hippocampus bit really makes a lot of sense. So yeah, it's really kind of resounding with a lot of people, that, Patrick, because we are routinal, aren't we? We fall back on our known behaviours, and we kind of go to what's comfortable rather than what's healthy and helpful to our kind of mental health.
Absolutely. Or even what's uncomfortable, we still end up doing it because of this habitual sort of pattern that's been laid down. And the hippocampus is really important in terms of trauma, because in a sense, the traumatic events continue to wash around in the hippocampus. And so every time that same stimuli comes up, we get that trigger of remembering, oh my God, this is like when X, Y, and Z happened. And the point of therapy with traumatic events and people who are suffering because of that is about helping that memory become what's called time-stamped in a different part of the brain called the post. So that if the trigger comes up, the same kind of stimuli comes up in the environment, the person can say, oh no, hang on a minute, that was happening way back when, it's not happening now. They can learn that it's not happening now, although before they can resolve that, it feels like it's actually happening now again, and it's being repeated. That's really important, because a lot of people will perhaps key into the fact that trauma is very much a continuing trigger for mental health difficulties.
Yeah, and that's Andy's just commented there that in 911, the same, 9/11, the same people were interviewed a few days after the event, and the basic things were changed. For example, a red car to a blue car. So that's the same thing, isn't it? Where we're talking about the timestamp and the change of information.
Absolutely, yeah. Each time we recollect something in our brain and then conceptualize it, and so we remember it, we there is a narrative there, oh, that happened, it gets changed slightly. So over time, things, our memory gets distorted. And there's a common experience. I don't know if you've ever been, and for people listening, you've gone back to the house you used to live in, or you've gone back to the school that you used to go to, and everything is very small. You remember it as bigger because you were a smaller person, when in actual reality, it's much bigger. So what your brain has to do then is accommodate that, and then we then lay down a new memory of, oh, it's not as big as I thought it was. And then obviously we might tell someone of this. And so in the brain starts to remember that, oh, it wasn't as small, as big, sorry. It was, there's some change in space. And that can be difficult. That's a very overt example. The more sort of subtle examples that to put there, that's spot on.
You're talking about changing kind of your behavior and your core kind of functions. How can that be done in what kind of time frame does it take for people to change those patterns and learn new kind of processes?
The key factor is motivation, and progress in therapy, and the time span of progress is largely dependent on how motivated someone is to change. People might be familiar with Prochaska and De Clementi's motivation to change model, and which they outline 4 states. So not willing to change, not motivated, considering change, not fully committed. The 3rd state is where we need to be, is fully committed, fully aware of consequences, and seeking change. And obviously the 4th part of the cycle is relapse, where motivation declines. So if a client or a person looking at their own mental health obviously needs someone to help them implement that change, or they can do it on their own. So obviously there's lots of self-help videos on YouTube, or you go and see someone like me, and you kind of, I always say that a good therapist is like a good plumber. If your boiler breaks down and you ring some guy and he turns up with a screwdriver in his back pocket, you're not going to be too impressed that he's going to fix your boiler, and you might sort of have a sneaking suspicion that he's going to rip you off. But if a guy turns up in nice clean overalls, all the right qualifications and stickers on his van, all the registrations, and he's got, importantly, a really big toolbox, you know that he's probably A, going to fix your boiler, because B, knows what he's doing. Now, that's where the analogy stops. As a therapist, I can't fix someone. I can teach someone and enable someone and motivate someone and give them the tools to fix themselves. And this theory that we've explored today is a foundational bedrock for understanding, where we then sort of think about, okay, you know how this thing in the mind is working now and compelling you to do this thing that you ultimately realize isn't helping. But here's how we relearn to try something else that is more adaptive, more helpful.
Yeah, brilliant. And just a question from Sasha there. In relation to what you were saying, as an holistic therapist, when not performing, people have to want to change in order to feel growth.
Yeah, we're back to motivation, aren't we? It's if you don't, you only, I think the easiest way to say it is, you only get out what you put in, and for a lot of mental health difficulties, it's about committing 100%. And what I tend to do in assessing clients when they refer themselves or refer to me, one of the key things I have to assess is motivation. And if the motivation isn't sort of at sort of a level that would mean change, that's what we have to work on first. So it's about perspective taking, about consequential thinking. Okay, well, if you continue to do this, why are you so surprised that you're not able to get up for work and that your boss is dragging you in and you're being sort of suspended and you're losing your temper all the time? If you continue to drink, that's probably what's continued to happen. So let's think about trying something different.
Yeah, and motivation probably it's different for everybody, isn't it? And because of the way that we kind of hardwired. But it also depends on our environment, I'd say, and our circumstances at the time. Because some days you can get up and you feel motivated, but then when you feel less motivated and there's external pressures, that's when you kind of quite easily fall back and slip into.
Absolutely. So that's where we have to investigate scientifically using the same sort of principles what it is we're doing that's not helping, and promote more things that we can do that are helping. So it's about this giving yourself a chance, keeping yourself safe, looking after yourself. The England cricket team have got this wonderful phrase now, haven't they? They've been using for a while. Back yourself, believe in yourself, know that the world isn't meant to be easy. It always throws you like curveballs. So stop trying to make it that way. Accept that something will happen that will F our day up today, and I have to deal with it. If I run away from it and I go to the pub, for example, you're sticking with that same coping strategy, the day that ensues is probably going to be the same as the previous one. So I've got to think about changing here. I've got to do something different. I've got to look after myself. I've got to take care of myself. So I think previous speakers and previous podcasts have focused on different ways of doing that. So it's about having your own tool bag of self-care, your own tool bag of belief. One of the key exercises I give my clients initially is called the 100 strengths exercise. Get my clients to write down 100 of their strengths. Most people listening would go, what? I don't think I've got 10. Yes, you have. The harder you look, the more you will find, because the more you accumulate sort of experience, the more you accumulate skills, knowledge, understanding, and experiences in of themselves are always a sort of mine, a gold mine of learning. It's about, this bad thing's happened to me. What can I learn from it? How can I do something differently next time round? Having that inquiring, curious mind to think about that rather than, oh my God, which we all do. Don't worry. I was doing that earlier because the technology wasn't working. But it's about sort of turning that around to your benefit. Have I lost you, Adam? I think.
Brilliant. Are you still with us, Patrick? You still there?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
You still there?
Yeah. I think we're having some technology.
Still here. Okay. I think that's been absolutely amazing, Patrick. Yeah. If anybody's got any questions or wants to talk to Patrick about anything else, he is absolutely amazing at what he does, and very, very intelligent and very kind of knowledgeable about mental health. So I just want to thank Patrick for coming on and talking to us in the brief time that we've had. Next week we'll be joined by Charlie Bethel, who's the CEO of the charity Men Sheds UK. So he's going to be talking about Men Sheds and what Men in Sheds is and what it does, and about how that's grown and developed. But yeah, if anybody would like any more information from Patrick, I can very easily put you in touch with Patrick. It's quite handy that we are brothers as well. So very, very handy connection to have. Thank you all for watching. And yes, we'll see you on the next podcast.
The MindField podcast has been presented by the Sanguine Writing House. the UK's leading provider of online mystery and strategy games, along with team training, mental health awareness, and mental health first aid courses. To find out more and to book your course or game, please visit tswh.co.uk.